And you can imagine, the heated conversations around our dinner table. A Cuban woman, we have one right here, who understands that. A Mexican father, the machismo. This is my dad, Fun fact about my father. Born December 7th, 1941. What day is that? Born on that same day. So he was born that day. And so he comes from talk about machismo. Woo. That was him in living color. And so those were some interesting dynamics in my household. But again, they shaped me. They shaped who I have become over the many years after. And so the journey begins. I'm in high school, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life? It was expected that I needed to go to college. I mean, my parents had it's not, you're going to graduate and go to work. You're going to go get an education. Because if we're working this hard, you're going to go do what you need to do. But I didn't go far. Just went down the road to San Diego. So I kind of stayed close. My mother didn't want me going any further than that. Anywhere where she can drive within 2 hours and she can be to see me, which is fine. And then, what am I going to do? And so I got my economics degree. Then I'm saying, what am I going to do after that? Go to law school, because lawyers make a lot of money. That was what I thought. And so I went to law school, but I went to Oklahoma for some strange reason. And, want to butt up against the reality of there not being that support network anymore. But it was good. It was good to get out of my comfort zone. And I think that's one of the takeaways here is stepping outside of your comfort zone. And I think that experience, moving there, going to school there, began to open the door for me that I enjoyed being outside of my comfort zone. Because that is when I learned the most, that is when I engaged the most, and that is when I felt that I was providing the greatest impact to whatever my mission or journey was that I wanted to do. I needed to step outside of my comfort zone. It forced me to really listen. It forced me to engage with individuals that were completely different than me, and the experiences that they lived throughout their lives and what I lived, it just gave me a different perspective of life. And so that experience, and then going down to Mexico as well. And I lived in Mexico for 4 years because I got a law degree there as well. And living in Puebla, Mexico, also, now as an adult, gave me a different perspective as well, and my father's journey and what he did in Mexico growing up, but also working. And so I worked and I went to school at night and I got my degree as well. And go back to Los Angeles, and I'm going to work for this big corporate law firm, make a lot of money. They pay you well, but when you're working 16-hour days, when you break it down and you do the per hour calculation, you're not making that much money. But I had no purpose. And that's what I kept telling my parents. There's just no purpose to what I'm doing. Contractual law, transactions, it's just empty to me. And I needed something more because I really wanted to serve, the experiences that my mother went through, that my father went through, and not just be an empty suit working behind a desk, which is great for some, and that's very admirable, and lots of people do it, but it wasn't for me. I needed something else. And that's where really the journey began. I left that, and I walked away from it. Mind you, my parents were saying, what the hell are you doing? And I had never traveled, let's say, been to vacation on the East Coast in New York, but really? She's never passed Arizona, let's say, instead of Oklahoma. And I applied to an internship. Didn't know anybody in Washington, D.C. Absolutely nobody. Applied to various internships, unpaid internships, and that's what I did. and I landed at the Organization of American States, which is the UN equivalent for our hemisphere, and as an intern. And what did I do at nights? Waited tables, bartended, and washed dishes. And I did that for a year because I had to pay rent, had to do those things. But I worked hard, and I wanted to get involved in things that would actually make a difference. And again, I will preface everything I say. You can agree, disagree with the politics and the policies that I did. It's fair game, but I did it. And I want you to know that my intent and the purpose of the things that I did was always with one thing in mind: serving. Serving our country, serving the underserved, serving those that don't have a voice. Could have done it the right way, wrong way, been criticized left and right by a lot of people, but I did it. And just to do that, it takes courage. It takes the intestinal fortitude to go out there and do those things when other people are not willing to do it. And so by doing that, I got involved in anti-corruption work. Because anti-corruption, to me, in my opinion, is what plagues most of our countries in this hemisphere, Latin America talking. It is the ill that drives everything else. You want to talk about narcotics, you want to talk about terrorism, you want to talk about all the social and economic ills of our hemisphere, to me, are founded on the principle of corruption. So I wanted to get involved in that crusade of anti-corruption. And so I was one of the individuals that was asked by the former president of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria, who at the time was the Secretary General of the UN, to lead a team into Latin America and begin the drafting of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. And so I got to travel. And that's where the whole 72 countries started. And it was a wonderful experience. I got to work with individuals, NGOs, civil society that was really working hard at the grassroots level to purge this evilness of corruption. And I also got to work with some very interesting characters at the governmental level, that corruption is the only way we know how to do business, because that's the only way things get done. You got to grease the skids here, you got to do this over here. That's what makes it work. But it really, at the end of the day, doesn't work. All it does is feeds the disparities. It feeds the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And that, to me, is not good. And so I did that for a few years. And then, those things happen in life. One day, I'm sitting there in my apartment in Old Town Alexandria, and I get a phone call. It's like 7 in the morning. And yes, this is the White House calling. And I'm like, okay, great. So what is this all about? I pay my taxes. I'm good. Don't worry about it. And no, there's White House presidential personnel, and we'd like to interview you. I'm like, okay, for what job? Can't tell you. Okay, great. Let me look at my calendar. No, can you be here at 8 a.m.? So be there in an hour. This stuff really does happen. It's not just in the movies. And so I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to get out of work? So, the typical, calling sick, doctor's appointment, whatever. I don't remember what I said. But I go in, and, they run you through the ringer. And this is 2001, so you all know who was president. And full day. Next day, I get another call. Can you be at the State Department? All day. My day ended at, I believe it was June 3rd, 2001. And I'm sitting at the 7th floor of the State Department. And if you've never been, the 7th floor, that's where the secretary is. They call it the 7th floor. That's how it's referred to. And I'm sitting there, and in walks General Powell. And he's like, well, I'm here to interview you. I mean, interview me for what? I mean, no one's even told me what in the world I'm going to do. And he's like, don't worry about it. So we talked. We talked for an hour. He was just picking my brain on a lot of different things regarding, global policy, international affairs, my own, beliefs and those things. And he's like, all right, good. Okay, so I go back. I get a call 15 minutes later. Do you want a job? And at the time, I'm dating the woman who eventually became my wife. And I asked her, well, what do we do? He's like, you only get asked once. And that is true. You only get asked once. So I took it. I had a great job, stability, but I said, again, I look at life as, forks in the road. You either go this way or you go that way. And I was up for the challenge. I wanted the ambiguity. I wanted the uncertainty of what lied ahead for me. And not just, I could have stayed in the job I had and made a career out of it for the next 30 years. But that's not me. And I tell everybody who I've ever worked for, I need challenge in my life, because if not, it's not who I am. So I take the job. I become chief of staff to an assistant secretary of state for Latin America. And the next 8 years of my life become a whirlwind. Travel the world. I move from anti-corruption to counter-narcotics, and I finish in counter-terrorism. And throughout all the different changes, and then when Secretary Rice became our secretary, from after she was the National Security Advisor, she asked me to join her team, and I did. And for those 4 years where she was Secretary of State, it was an amazing experience. Again, you can disagree or disagree with her politics and her policies, but there is no more amazing woman that this country has ever seen, in my opinion. Growing up in Alabama, doing what she has done in her career to make herself better every single day, not only from the politics, the policies, but the arts. World-class piano player, loves the NFL, just plays golf. She's actually very good. It was just an amazing person to learn from. And to this day, she is still my mentor. We still talk once a month, and it's an amazing conversation to have with her. She comes from academia. She went into government. Now she's back in academia, and she loves it. That's where her heart really belongs, and she's back at Stanford. Through that journey and meeting so many amazing individuals, and as I got in more and more into the counterterrorism world, there's the action side of counterterrorism, where you're targeting very bad individuals, and you have to do that job. You can't stop doing that job. But I always ask myself the underlying reasons of why these things are happening. Lack of education, lack of opportunities. And so one of the things that my team did was begin to establish, this is a long-term issue. This is not, we're going to eliminate terrorism in one day. It just doesn't happen. This is a generational fight. This is a generational movement that you have to go and try to begin to provide those resources to the babies, to the children. And, respecting, the cultural differences, the religious differences, but trying to implement some sort of program to where, I'm not here to change a Muslim into a Christian. That is not where we begin from. What we begin from is, you can be a Muslim, but you got to have math skills. You got to know how to read and write. And not just from a religious perspective, but also just from a regular, basic, elementary, primary educational platform. And so we've begun to go into those countries and, children's books, math books, books that we would work with the elders and the clergy and the tribal leaders to be, you identify folks, you create champions throughout this longitudinal effort. And so that led me to South Sudan, Iraq, Syria, all these different countries. Amazing experiences. And, then there came that crossroads again. The Bush administration's out, Obama administration comes in, and I'm thinking, now what am I going to do? Now I've been pegged as a Bush kid. What am I going to do now? Well, I was asked to stay on. Literally. January 20th comes, the famous, you turn out the lights, and midnight comes, a new team comes in. That literally did happen. The difference is I didn't turn out the light of my office. I was asked to stay on. So I resigned and was picked up literally 1 minute later so I wouldn't have a lapse in health coverages and all those, because I already had kids by then. But I was asked into a very different role. No longer, quote unquote, the diplomat. I was asked to work for one of our intelligence agencies. Because of the network of contacts that I, developed over the previous 8 years, the president, the secretary, and others believed we needed to exploit those contacts now. And, that's where the duty to serve, that fire in me to serve my country came. And so for a few years, I became an intelligence officer. And, you can agree or disagree with what we do, but there is a purpose to what we do. And I can't go into much detail of what I did and where I was and the things that I did, but I can assure you the following, that a lot of the things that I started in the previous administration to address the educational deficiencies, the knowledge and the resource deficiencies, those things continued. Even as I was doing what I was doing, I made sure those things would continue. Because if they were to drop off, then to start these things over again, knowing the challenging environment in Congress to get funding for these type of things would go to waste. And I was not going to allow that. And I made sure as I came onto the new administration, I had firm commitments that these things would continue. My wife thought I was crazy. Now it's when she's thinking, wait a minute, now you're putting everything at risk here, doing what I went on to do for several years. Family had to move around a lot. I had to be separated from my family months, and at the end, years at a time. And that was not easy. And it was not easy because as the years went on, I came to realize that everything that I had done up to that point was serving the underserved, serving my country, but I could see no direct impact to the country that raised me and educated me. It was always done somewhere else. It was benefiting somewhere else. And I would have these long conversations with my wife and my friends saying, when will I be able to give back to a community here? Deliver direct impact here. And so for a couple of years, that debate just began to circle. And it really came, full and frontal when I was in Afghanistan. Because I really started to question, what in the world are we doing? And that was tough. Because I knew what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, but what was the bigger picture? And it all happened on April 7th, 2011. As I'm in Zabul province, which is southern Afghanistan, and we're out delivering books to school children. We had a school that we had sponsored, that we had all the buy-in from all the tribal elders, the provincial governor, the mayor, everybody. And it was a girls' school. Because obviously, education for women was not, part of normal life in Afghanistan. And delivering those books, the entire caravan, we were in a car bomb explosion. And I was in the third car. The bomb went off on the first car. And, a lot of my colleagues, civilian and military, were killed. But there was this one girl who was in the first car, a young diplomat. She was 23 years old, from Pennsylvania, Annie. And, this was her first post in Afghanistan. And she got out of college and, she wanted to be a U.S. diplomat. She went into the Foreign Service, passed the test, did the whole thing. And her first posting was Afghanistan, which was a little unusual, but that's where she wanted to go. Killed instantly. And as she was going through the process of becoming a diplomat, I became her mentor. And so when she was assigned to Afghanistan, I raised my hand very quickly and said she could come work for me. And she was like, let's do it. And 2 weeks later, she's dead. And that's when I came to realize this is it. No more. Too many folks in Afghanistan that I picked up from the battlefield and had to carry. Too many ceremonies of the fallen. For what? For what bigger picture, but for what for me and my family? I did not want to become that. And there was also a point, in full disclosure in this room, it was going to cost me my marriage. It was going to cost me my family. I was away for too long. My daughter, who was the youngest of the three, didn't see her born, I was a stranger to her, literally. And so another crossroad. Because now I was really getting to, as many of you know, that 20-year mark. Because if you make it to that 20-year mark, you get, full pension, full retirement benefits from the federal government. It's good. But that's not what defines me. And so I left. I remember telling Secretary Clinton on a video conference saying, the moment the ambassador gets on that plane and leaves, I'm in the row right behind him, leaving with him. And I ain't coming back. She looked at me like I was nuts. Sergio, you can't leave. Oh, I'm leaving. And I left. And then it was like, now what am I going to do? This is all I've ever known. But developing those networks is what helped me. Developing those friendships and those contacts. And, a lot of people ask me, Sergio, why higher ed? Why academic medicine? I don't know. When I went and I started interviewing, I went to 10 different places. And I'm not going to name them. And, I became finalist in almost all of them. And right when the decision point came up, I always had a president or a chancellor say, Sergio, you are great, but you have no higher education experience. And then, I'm thinking diversity, inclusion, experience should be somewhere in there. But there was this one place that did, and that's Northeast Ohio Medical University. And Dr. Jay Gershon, a dentist who leads that academic medical center. And he's like, no, you know what? I don't want someone with higher ed education. I really do value diversity around the executive table, diversity of thought, experiences. And he gave me that first opportunity. And, you know, it was weird because I'm like, I'm really going to have a real job back home, Ohio, not home, but back in the States for the first time ever. And it's, you know, I get to go to work, go home every day, which was a totally foreign concept to me. And the adjustment was difficult. I'm not going to lie. It took me at least a good year and a half. You know, maybe it's post-traumatic syndrome. I don't know. Because, I mean, I saw a lot of stuff, a lot of bad stuff. But it was just difficult to adjust back to home life. But what comforted me is I really started getting involved in programs, pipeline programs, going to underserved communities, distressed communities, because it brought me back home. It brought me back to when I was young in East Los Angeles, listening to my parents, listening to their struggles. And in my view of the world, you know, it's you set these programs up, you provide them the opportunity, but there has to be a point where people have to go out on into their own and become self-accountable to themselves. You can't do it all for them, because the moment you do that, you're not creating success. You're not creating independence. And so we did a wonderful program at Neomed with Cleveland State University. We created an urban primary care pipeline. And it was a back and post-bac. So individuals that never thought of medical school, they do the 2 years post-bac, and then they have guaranteed entrance into medical school. But it was targeted to the urban community in Cleveland. Because, if you've been there, you have the Cleveland Clinic, you have UH, you have Metro Health. And what's circling right around these three entities, some of the poorest, some of the most distressed, some of the highest violence in all of the United States. And you have these world-renowned organizations that do nothing for those communities. And so our thought was, let's educate, recruit, train kids from that community to serve in that community. And we will pay for their entire education if they give us 5 to 7 years of service in those communities, and we will set up the clinics for them in those communities. It's on its 7th year today. Successful. And that, to me, of everything I've ever done in my career, was probably my proudest moment. Because now we are starting to see indicators of health inch up a little bit. I mean, it's not going to be done overnight. Violence, maybe down a little bit. But it creates hope that you're in this community, you're in this neighborhood, and there's the local doc that you can go to. And you know what? It's James. He grew up here 2 blocks down the street, played football for this high school, went to school at Cleveland State, went down the road to Rootstown, Ohio to Neomed, and he went off and did his residency somewhere. But he's back. He's back to the community that raised him. And he's giving back. To me, a wonderful model that hopefully one day it's something that we can do here in partnership with another university, maybe the one across the street, I don't know. But it's something that we can do because it's been done, and it was done in Cleveland, especially, and same dynamic, folks. Cleveland State wanted their own medical school. We're saying, why? If the public medical school is literally 15 miles down the road. Made no sense. You had Case Western, big medical school, thriving medical school, but their mission is completely different. They're attracting students from across the world to come to their medical school. And so another crossroad then appeared, another challenge, is that I wanted to understand the business of healthcare. You know, it's one thing as you see it from the higher ed perspective. It's another to be in the trenches. So I said, well, what's a good opportunity? I don't want to go work at the clinic or UH. That's just a monster, and I'll get eaten alive right out of the bat. And so an opportunity in Potsdam, New York. When I first got the call from the recruiter, and he said, Potsdam, New York. I'm like, where in the world is Potsdam, New York? And when you ask folks, where is Potsdam, New York? I mean, I'm like, my wife looks at the map. He's like, oh, so we're moving to Canada. And I'm like, I guess we are. and so we go to Potsdam, New York, you know, working for the St. Lawrence Health System, Kent Potsdam Hospital, and running the operations there. You know, it gave me a whole new perspective. Man, what a perspective. And I know Dr. Thompson's been out there in Governor and Potsdam. It just gives you a whole perspective of rural America. And how there are a lot of similarities to urban America, but big differences as well. And, you know, it was a challenge. But it was a challenge that began to really wear on me for my children. And, you know, November comes along, we have a new president. And 2 weeks after his election, my eldest, in elementary, kid comes up to him and says, hey, you're going to get deported. My son doesn't even know what the word deported even means. And so he asked the other boy, what does that mean? Well, you got to go back and live in Mexico. We're going to throw you out. So my son comes home crying. My wife calls me. You got to come home. I'm like, okay. The hospital's only 5 minutes away from where we lived. And I come home and he's just, I couldn't console him. He's like, what's going on? Some kids said we're moving to Mexico. I'm like, we're not moving to Mexico. We go to vacation to Mexico. We go visit family, but we're not moving to Mexico. And I'm like, you know, just brush it off. Don't pay any mind to this kid. Next day, another kid punches my kid in the face, knocks his tooth out. And you guys need to leave. I'm like, now I'm, you know, upset. And I go to the school, talk to the principal, talk to the teacher. You know, kids are going to be kids. That was the response. I'm like, okay, kids are going to be kids. Where are these kids getting this from? My wife is hysterical. I'm trying to, you know, bring some rationale to what's going on. And I tell this story because there's a lot of work to be done. My kids play basketball. They were playing basketball. This is 2 weeks later. And a parent from the stands yells, this is practice, get those Mexican kids off the floor because Mexicans don't know how to play basketball. See, now emotion starts to, I'm like, someone's going to get knocked out here real quick. But I turn around, and lo and behold, the person that yelled it was a middle school teacher. And that's when I said, enough's enough. The purpose of why I'm saying this is, you know, if my children were high school age, you know, I'd probably stayed there and we're going to fight this. But I was not going to put a target on a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 7-year-old's back so early in life. No. Because, first of all, where I grew up, that wouldn't even have happened in East Los Angeles. People would have gotten killed if it happened. And my wife's a Colombian citizen. Lived all her life in Colombia. Came to the country 18 years ago. Became a citizen 17 years ago. Because when we got married and I was a diplomat, cool story by the way, there's only two people that the Constitution allows to grant citizenship without going through the process. President and the Attorney General. Those are the only two. So the day I took my oath of office, the following day, we get a phone call from Attorney General Ashcroft. Come to our office and bring your wife. And she was sworn in as a U.S. citizen that day because being the role that I had, I could not be married to a foreign national. Great story. Great picture, by the way, too. Because she was surprised as hell. She was not I wasn't expecting it. But back to Potsdam. You know, another fork in the road. Do we stay there and go through that? Or do I seek out an opportunity that brings the stability that we need as a family? Because, you know, there's your professional career, but I'm not going to trample on the future of my children either. And so we're here. And luckily, you know, things happen for a reason. As I was going through that, the president was looking for a chief of staff. And given, you know, being at CPH, we have a love-hate relationship with Upstate because of the transfers and all those things. And sometimes, you know, it's not the best of relationships. I was given this opportunity that I cherish every day because I live in a community that values diversity, that values who we are and where we come from, but also the challenge of working for this organization. There's a lot of work to be done, but good work to be done. And so as I made that journey, one of the things, and I'll end with this, is all the opportunities that I was afforded throughout my career, I began to do that for others. And the network of men and women that we work together in the government, that we have the closest of relationships, we started our own network and started identifying other young professionals from different walks of life. And we brought them with us. And we began to mentor them and give them the opportunities that we had, with one stipulation: that they do the same thing as they began to progress in their career. And we made them sign for it, even though it's worth nothing on the paper it's written. But it was symbolic. And so, over my career, I've done that for 20. There's one gentleman in particular. His name is Brian Morales. He started as a fellow with me at the State Department in 2001. In 2012, he became the Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama administration for international narcotics and law enforcement. And a proud moment. Felt like a dad. Went to a swearing in. I got to swear him in. So the 20 that I've brought through, each of them now 5, 10. And that's how you begin to create the sustainability of these formal or informal, in this case informal program, of providing opportunities to those that wouldn't even know where to go get the opportunity. And that's the key. As I'm working on this Alliance for Economic Inclusion, which is part of the Regional Economic Development Committee, which is the governors, you know, the URI and the DRI and all that, is how can we expect organizations to apply for these funds when they don't have the basic knowledge of how to apply for these funds? They put in grant proposals that make no sense sometimes. So why don't we be proactive and go out and teach them how to do it so they can become competitive. It's not that we're going to give them the money, but at least show them how to do it. Because once you show them and they're able to get a grant somewhere down the line, it proves that it can be done. And then it motivates them to even go out and get more funds for their programs. So by doing that at the mentorship level in the foreign affairs world, that I continue to do that, I know I'm creating a difference. I know personally I can go home at night, put my head on my pillow, and say, I feel good for what I have done throughout this journey. A difficult journey. It hasn't been easy. There's been some roadblocks that I've encountered, but I've always been able to plow through them through hard work, dedication, service, and loyalty to the country that I served for many years, and now that I serve here at Upstate with all of you. That's my story.
Thank you, Sergio, for that wonderful story. Do we have any questions for Mr. Garcia?
Oh, Mr. Frost.
I can't resist. Sounds like you started in 2001. What was it like being in federal government? 9/11 was
I was right there.
later.
I was actually at the White House when 9/11 happened. Didn't shower or shave for like 7 days. I couldn't leave. It was quite a scene. And, you know, the whole notion of, you know, the fog of war, you know, it was in living color right there. Communication, just misinformation, you know, half-truths, not having the full story. You share that information, but you have to share it even if you can't even validate that it's true, but you have to put it out there because you can't risk it being true and had something else horribly go wrong. And so you were caught off guard. I can vouch for that. And the good that came of it is the whole restructuring of the intelligence agencies that happened because of that, because of the stovepipes that we had. Now the sharing of information is there, even though the systems, the electronic systems to share the information, still not there. That's a reality.
Any other questions?
God, I thought I was going to get Osama bin Laden questions and stuff like that. It's good.
Thank you, everyone. Please be on the lookout for our November Diversity Lecture Series, and we'll be focusing on Native American History Month during that time. I thank all of you for coming. If you haven't signed in, there's a sign-in sheet going around. And also, I do apologize. Lunch is served outside of the room. There was a delay. But if you have the opportunity and you have the time, I welcome you to enjoy a fajita bar outside in the lobby. Thank you.
Fajita